everyone, and welcome back to the Faith and Focus podcast, your go-to space for smashing your A Level RS revision. I'm Laura, and today we're diving into one of the most important areas of the OCR course, religion and ethics. This episode will help you lay strong foundations in ethical theory, so we're going to look entirely at the big four: natural law, situation ethics, Kantian ethics, and utilitarianism. We'll have a look at what each theory says, where they come from, how they differ from each other, and get some prep in there for your AO1 and your AO2 for your exam. So segment number 1, what is ethics and why does it matter? So ethics is the study of morality, how we decide what is right or wrong. In this paper, you'll look at normative ethics, which offers frameworks for moral decision making. In this exam, you'll need to be aware of what each theory is and be able to explain it clearly and with scholarly depth, and be able to analyse the strengths and weaknesses and how they compare. So understanding each theory's foundation and purpose is going to let you answer any applied or evaluative questions with confidence. So let's get started. So number 1 is natural law. Okay, this comes from Thomas Aquinas. And this is a deontological argument and an absolutist argument. So deontological means that the theory focuses on the inherent rightness or wrongness of the action itself, not the outcome. So for Aquinas, something like lying is wrong regardless of the result. For it to be absolutist means that moral rules are fixed and universal, so they apply in all situations to all people, doesn't matter about time or culture. There are no exceptions. So a core concept of natural law is this idea of telos. So natural law is based on the idea that everything in nature has a purpose or a telos. So Aquinas built on Aristotle's ideas that you'll remember from philosophy of religion, that human flourishing is about eudaimonia, okay, so our fulfillment of our purpose. For Aquinas, he views our telos, humanity's telos, as ultimate union with God. That's the point of our existence. So we are made with reason, and by using reason, we can discover how to live morally and then fulfill that telos or that purpose. So how do we do that then? What is natural law and what does Aquinas say? So Aquinas says that there are 4 levels or tiers of law that guide our morality as human beings. So the lowest one, in inverted commas, is human law. Okay, so that is rules that we make, and that should be rooted in natural law. The next tier is natural law. So that is the moral code that we have because of human reason, and everyone can access it. It's not just a religious thing. It's not just a Christian thing. It's there for everybody. Okay, thus making it universal to everybody. The next level up from that is divine law. So anything that has come from scripture. So if something's in the Bible, we should adhere to that because that is God revealing himself, and that's what he wants us to do. And then the top tier is eternal law. And that is God's perfect will and reason, and only God knows what that is. We can never access that. So like our top tier that we can achieve as human beings, if you like, is divine law, because it's anything that comes from scripture when God has revealed himself to humans. So natural law acts as the bridge between God and human, divine and human. It's how we use our reason that God gave us to know what God wants us to do. So Aquinas then looks at something called the 5 primary precepts. So these are the core principles that guide our behaviour. And he says that these are absolute and unchanging. So number 1, preserve life. Number 2, reproduce. Number 3, educate the young. Number 4, live in an ordered society. And number 5, worship God. Okay, so they reflect the most basic aspects or elements of human nature. So when you whittle it down to what we need to do as human beings in order to live in society and be relatively happy, those 5 things are what we need to do. Now, we can derive secondary precepts from that, and that would be things like do not murder, don't use contraception, etc. But those rules come from the primary precepts for a specific situation. But the primary precepts is kind of what we should always be going back to, if you like. So what are the strengths and weaknesses of natural law? You will have come across and done a lot of this in depth. These are just very quick overviews for the purposes of revision. So, strengths of natural law. It offers a universal, rational structure for moral decision making. So, as we said, it's not specifically religious. It is something that is given to us by God as He creates humanity. So it doesn't matter whether you are an atheist or not, a religious person or not. We can all use natural law because it's universal. It respects human dignity and purpose. So why are we created? We are created because God created us in His image. Okay, so therefore we have dignity and we have purpose, and we shouldn't be, doing random things like killing each other, because we need to respect what God created. And it works across religious and non-religious contexts via reason, as we've already said. Weaknesses. It's quite inflexible. Okay, the problem with something being absolutist is it doesn't adapt or bend to a situation. Number 2, it also assumes belief in a God-given purpose or telos, which obviously if you are an atheist, you won't believe in. So whilst reason is universal, the belief in a telos is not universal. And it can lead to outcomes that clash with compassion or common sense. So if you were taking contraception as an example, we know that contraception stops STDs from spreading. In places like Africa, in lots of different countries in Africa, there is a epidemic of STDs, AIDS, things like that. Now, it would be silly not to encourage people to use contraception in that case. Okay? But natural law would say, no, it doesn't matter. So, it does give a contradiction. Okay, so a key quote from Aquinas then: good is to be done and pursued, and evil avoided. Number 2 then. So second ethical theory is situation ethics, and this comes from Joseph Fletcher. Okay, so this is a teleological and a relativist argument. So teleological means it focuses on the outcomes of an action to decide whether it's right or wrong. So natural law is the opposite, because that's focusing on the inherent value of the action. The moral value is found in what the action achieves, not in the action itself. And if it's relativist, it means that moral rules are not fixed, so they're adapted to the situation based on what is the most loving outcome. So no action in itself is right or wrong. It entirely depends on context. And that's important. Okay, so the core idea comes from Joseph Fletcher in the 1960s. So this is a fairly modern ethical theory. So it's a Christian ethical theory because it works from the basis of love. And it works from a specific type of love, which is agape. So agape is unconditional, selfless love. And that is the love that Jesus gave us. And that is the love that God gives us. So that is unconditional, selfless love. And Joseph Fletcher puts that at the centre of moral decision making. So he says that if you use a legalistic approach, i.e. something very strict and rule following, like natural law, that fails to show compassion. But then you can't have total freedom, because then you get chaos. Okay, so his solution is what he called principled relativism. So it's one guiding principle: do the most loving thing. So in that situation, what is the most loving thing to do? Hence why it's context dependent. Key concepts of situation ethics. We've got the 4 working principles. So this is how does it operate. So we've got number 1, pragmatism. What works in practice? Number 2, relativism. The rules bend to fit the love, so whatever it is, you need to do the love in that instance. Positivism, we're believing that love is the highest good, so whatever we do in love is the best form of good that we can do. And personalism, people come before the rules. So then underneath that, we get the 6 fundamental principles. So this is what we're working from in terms of assumptions, if you like, as a situation ethicist. So we're coming from the idea that love is the only norm. Only love is intrinsically good. Love and justice are the same. Love wills the neighbour's good. Only the end justifies the means. And love's decisions are made situationally. So, strengths of situation ethics. So, it's rooted in Christian teaching. It's rooted in Jesus' teaching, actually, because that idea of love thy neighbour, treat others as you wish to be treated, is very much Jesus' arguments. It's compassionate and adaptable to individual circumstances. So, whatever is going on in your life, it's really easy to use that idea of doing the most loving thing. That is something that is easy to do, and it does challenge legalism and moral rigidity. So it does mean that, you know, you're questioning that and saying, yeah, but is that actually the best thing? Weaknesses of situation ethics. It could be too subjective. So what you decide is the most loving thing might be different from what I decide is the most loving thing, and therefore that it can vary across the board, which can make it a bit difficult. There are no clear boundaries within that. Okay, that's also a weakness. So because it can vary, it means there are no boundaries, like organising what people can or can't do. Where is the boundary of what is a loving thing? So it does mean that you could justify morally questionable acts. And another weakness, it's not easily applicable to large-scale ethical decisions. So, for example, if you're trying to make laws for a country, deciding what the most loving thing to do is would be very difficult, because that's such an individualised thing. So a key quote is, "Love is the only norm," and that is Joseph Fletcher. So number 3, Kantian Ethics. So this comes from Immanuel Kant. So this again is a deontological and absolutist argument. Deontological means actions are judged by whether they follow a moral duty, not by the consequence. And absolutist is, again, that the rules apply universally, all times and situations. So for Kant, morality is rational, fixed and consistent. So the core idea behind this is that Kant believed morality has got to be rooted in reason. Okay, so very similar to Aquinas in that respect. And that humans are capable of working out moral duties for themselves. We shouldn't act out of emotion. We shouldn't act out of a need to achieve a particular outcome. But we should act out of a sense of duty and respect for others. You could argue in that respect it's very similar to situation ethics, because it's still got that focus of other people at the centre of it. So Kant comes up with the categorical imperative. That's very difficult for me to say. And that is his test for moral action. So that includes 3 things. So it includes universal law formulation. Act only on principles you'd want everyone to follow. Number 2, humanity is an end. So don't use people as a means to an end. They are the end in themselves. So respect the dignity. And number 3, this idea of the kingdom of ends. So act as though your choices shape everyone else in their morality. So for Kant, the only true motivation morally is acting from goodwill. You do it because it's right, not because it gets you anywhere or gets you anything. Okay, so strengths of Kant's argument then. It's clear, it's logical, and it's universal rules. It treats all humans with inherent dignity, and it avoids manipulating or exploiting people, which could be an argument against situation ethics. Weaknesses, though, it ignores the consequences, even if they are severe. So, what is the outcome of doing something? It might not always be what you think. It can be too rigid. There's no flexibility for exceptional situations, which do happen. And it's not very sensitive for people, like emotionally sensitive. So it's a purely rational endeavour. There's no emotion involved. So a quote from Kant: act only according to that maxim whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law, i.e. only do the thing if you would want it to become a law for everyone at the same time. Okay, number 4 then is utilitarianism. So this is Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill. So this is teleological and relativist. So again, this is about the consequences of an action. So that's telos, what is the outcome? And relativist means that it's not fixed. It depends on the context and the outcome. So the core idea for utilitarianism is a consequentialist theory focusing on producing the greatest happiness for the greatest number. Okay, so it's not religious. It's not based in belief in God. It is secular. Okay, so it applies to human experience and reason to guide ethical decision making. And because it's not religious, everyone can do it. Okay, so we've got 2 different types of utilitarianism. You've got quantitative utilitarianism, which is Jeremy Bentham, and you've got qualitative utilitarianism, which is John Stuart Mill. So Jeremy Bentham's quantitative utilitarianism. So Bentham believes that all human beings are driven by 2 things, pleasure and pain. So the most moral action is the one that maximises pleasure and minimises pain, i.e. does the greatest good. Okay, so to measure and compare the value of different actions, he has something called the hedonic calculus. Okay, so this is how it's a tool to decide how much pleasure or pain an action will produce. So there are 7 factors. So there's the intensity, how strong is the pleasure, duration, how long does it last, certainty, how likely is it that that pleasure will occur. Number 4 is the remoteness of it, or the propinquity. How soon will the pleasure last? I find that very difficult to say. Fecundity, will the pleasure lead to more pleasure? Purity, how free from pain is the pleasure? And the extent, how many people will be affected? Okay, so according to Bentham, if you weigh up all of those different things, that will give you the outcome that is going to get the greatest happiness for the greatest number. So the morally right action is the one with the highest net pleasure when all of those different things are considered. So intensity, duration, certainty, propinquity, fecundity, purity, and extent. So on to John Stuart Mill then, and qualitative utilitarianism. So Mill agrees with this idea of focusing on happiness, greatest happiness for the greatest number, but he says that not all pleasures are equal. So he distinguishes between higher pleasures and lower pleasures. So higher pleasure is intellectual, moral and cultural, so reading, philosophy, things like that. Lower pleasures is the bodily and physical stuff, so that's eating, sleeping, sex, that kind of thing. So Mill believed that higher pleasures contribute more to human flourishing and they should be prioritised. 2 types of utilitarianism as well. You've got act utilitarianism and rule utilitarianism. So act, evaluate the consequences of the action, and rule, follow the rules that lead to the greatest happiness, on balance. Strengths then is democratic. So everyone's happiness is counted equally. So your happiness is no greater than mine. We all have a value, particularly if you use the hedonic calculus. Practical, it's rooted in real life consequences and real life experience, and it's adaptable, so it can work across cultures and belief systems because it's not based in religion. Okay, so it's not based in a Judeo-Christian idea of God and what that means. It's just let's look after each other and do the best for each other. Weaknesses. Again, you can justify immoral actions. So you could punish an innocent person if that is going to be better. It's difficult to predict or quantify the outcomes because it's so specific. And it can ignore justice and individual rights. So a key quote from Jeremy Bentham: "The greatest happiness of the greatest number is the foundation of morals and legislation." Segment 3, we're going to look at a revision strategy. So we're going to look at flashcard mapping. Right, so ethical theories are really content heavy. It's terminology rich. There's loads of words that you don't know. So you need to think about specific thinkers, specific key concepts, quotes, strengths and weaknesses, all under time pressure. So that is going to be incredibly tough. If you create some flashcard mapping, that will help you to build up those retrieval skills, which we keep banging on about, and spot comparative connections. So things that relate to each other and link together, things that you can compare and contrast against each other. So how do we do this? Right, so start with a theory per card. So you might start with, on the front, what is natural law? And then on the back, you might put, it's deontological, absolutist, key thinker is Aquinas, it's about 5 primary precepts, 4 tiers of law, and the purpose is fulfillment of telos through reason. Okay, and make sure that you've got structured sections on the back of each one. So you might divide it into 5 and have type, key thinker, historical context, core ideas and concepts, strengths and weaknesses, and then some key quotes. Okay, so it makes it specific and you've got like a flow of what they look like, so it's similar. Then you want to create some more flashcards, maybe mini ones or maybe different coloured ones, depending on what you want to do. And then you would apply topics across theories. So you might put, how would natural law respond to euthanasia? Which theory values motive over consequence? Which theories are compatible with Christianity? And then you can link them together. And you've got themes then of things that you can use to evaluate. So if you were looking at absolutist versus relativist, then you would put that natural law and Kant are absolutist and situation ethics and utilitarianism are relativist, and then you can compare them in that respect. You would colour code, always colour code. Okay, so AO1 would be definitions, key terms and thinkers. AO2 would be evaluation, comparison and criticisms, and then quotes might be in a different colour like green or red. And then you could add challenge cards. So if you wanted to get to those highest levels of evaluation, you want to start stretching the links between things, because everyone is going to be able to compare, natural law and Kant with situation ethics and utilitarianism. You need to be able to then say, what are the subtleties between them all? Okay? So you might say, compare Kantian ethics and situation ethics on motive. Which theory is most practical in a secular society? Which is the most compatible with modern law? So that gives you that subtlety and those nuances of argument that are really important when you want to get to those higher level AO2 scores. Okay, so if you wanted to do a weekly revision drill, 3-3-3 rule. So 3 cards per theory, 3 times a week for 3 weeks. Now, obviously, that will depend on when you start your revision. Bonus tip, you can use Quizlet for digital revision if you want. And it's good for spaced repetition and mobile practice if you've got it on your phone. Okay, so why does it work? So flashcard mapping turns dense essay content, of which we know there is 26 minutes worth of content, into bite-sized chunks that you can recall, review and adapt for comparison. So you're training your brain to do what the exam requires you to do, okay, which is obviously a good thing. Okay, so that's it for this episode of the Faith and Focus podcast. So we've looked at all 4 normative ethical theories. Next episode, we will look at how these apply to business ethics and euthanasia. So stay tuned for that. Please keep revising. Please keep using the techniques that we've looked at. And as we said, next time we will look at how we apply those things. So until next time, stay curious, keep questioning, and keep learning. Bye!